Hello, I'm Amber and welcome to my knitting studio. This is a tutorial for the Jolly Cardy, which is designed to be worn open or closed with buttons and includes lots of options like fade option, stripe option, and also a sleeveless version. This video includes a construction overview. The construction is unusual. It's knit sideways, so it's knit from the centre of the back out to the end of each sleeve. The tutorial also includes information about how to make the most of the yarn that you're using for this project, including the stripe and fade option. There are a few technique videos included in this tutorial as well. These include Judy's Magic Cast On, a Stretchy 3-needle bind off, or the optional Grafting Stockinette and the Tubular Bind Off option. Most of these I made to go with the Jolly Jumper tutorial. So you'll notice that this makes an appearance a little bit in the video. The techniques are very much the same because the construction of both garments, the Jolly Jumper and the Jolly Cardy, each section is chapterized, so you can just skip ahead to the part that's relevant to you. Happy Jolly knitting! There are 11 sizes to choose between and 2 lengths. You can choose cropped, which both of my samples are, or the slightly longer regular length, which hits around the hip bone. And as mentioned, no sleeves. You can adjust the sleeves to whichever length you like. And you can, as the hem is knit at the end, you can reduce or increase the length of that according to how you might want the length to fit. There are a few ways that you can customize this to make it something you love. There's a detailed sizing chart that gives the finished dimensions of the garment as well as the suggested bust size. So you start on the top row looking at the bust measurement, which would equate to your actual bust measurement, and then look down at the finished measurements for that size to see how much ease you would get and the other measurements. I do suggest you then pick a garment that you like to wear and measure that and see how that corresponds to the measurements that you're maybe looking at for your size, and that will help you choose the best fit for you. The construction of the Jolly Cardy. If you've knit the Jolly Jumper, you'll be familiar with it. It's the same construction. The only real difference is the opening at the front. So when you're working the front, that will be where you'll notice a difference. Page 8 of the pattern has a diagram with a helpful chart and overview of the construction that you can refer to as you're knitting, so you can keep track that way. It's important to note which is the right and left side of the garment in terms of the pattern. The pattern refers to this side as the right side and this side as the left. So even though I'm looking at it now and this is my right, that may be a little confusing. This is the right side of the garment and it refers to as it is worn. When I'm wearing it, this will be the right side of the garment. Jolly Cardy is cast on at the back, and you'll start at the centre back with Judy's Magic Cast On. This little stripe arrangement here may be a little confusing, but I will get to that when I talk about colours. That's intentional. Here we've cast on at the centre back line, and the Judy's Magic Cast On forms the first 2 rows going towards the right side of the garment. So if you're working 6-row stripes, this will be the first 2 rows of the 6-row stripe. And you'll continue along, knitting until you get to this point. And then on a separate set of needles, you'll cast on the front stitches here, being mindful that the 2 centre back rows here are not worked at the front. The front has the button band instead, so you'll be casting on with the colours either side of those 2 centre rows to make sure that they line up with your stripes And when you get to this point, so you'll knit across this way, across the right side of the garment, then some stitches will be cast on here as you join the back and fronts together. Then you'll knit back and forth towards the armhole. There's some shoulder shaping, and then when you get to this point, you will be dividing this section of the body from the sleeve. As part of this division, you'll be working some underarm rows, and here on my size, or sizes 1 to 5, have one back row and one front row here in the underarms. Sizes 6 to 11 will actually have 4 rows for the underarms, and that's good information to be mindful of when you're working out your colours. So here again I've worked a kind of purple for the black to avoid having a double black row here, and then when I come to the arm I continued working the black for the stripe continuation. I'll talk about that more in the colour section. Then the garment will be worked in the round to complete the sleeve and the cuff. At this point, under the arm will be joined with either a stretchy 3-needle bind off, or, as I chose to do for this one, you might like to opt for a grafted join here. I think for the stripes, the 3-needle bind off works well, and because I wanted the fade to be more seamless, I chose the grafting there. Then you'll work the left side in the same way. However, this time you'll be picking up the stitches from the provisional or the Judy's Magic cast on here and working across. Then you'll cast on the front, join here and work down to complete the sleeve. Next, you'll be picking up the stitches for the hem and working the hem. And finally, you'll pick up stitches for the collar band and work the collar band, and so on your buttons. So that's a construction. There is an option for a sleeveless version, and I haven't knit the cardigan style, but it's essentially the same as the pullover version. And essentially here, once you have completed the underarm rows and joined, you don't knit the sleeve, you just knit a section of ribbing instead. My goal when designing the Jolly jumper and the Jolly Cardy was initially to be able to incorporate a 24 colour festive set into the project. To assist with that, there is a section towards the back of the pattern that includes the yardage that you would require for each stripe for your size, how many stripes that you'll need for your size, for the body and the sleeves. And it's worth keeping in mind that, for example, my size, there's 26 body stripes overall. That includes the front and back stripes, or where there's just a section, this here counts as a stripe front and back. The underarms count, this underarm, which was a back stripe and then a front, and then they join together, counts as one stripe. So the 26 stripes includes front and back as one. And then here, this sleeve stripe is a continuation of the underarm, so I would use the same colour. However, the sleeve stripes are counted from there. For this size, I have 19 stripes. So that's useful information for helping calculate how you can make the most of your yardage, and particularly when it comes to working out the fade option that you might like to knit. So the stripes are a good way of maximising a festive set. Perhaps if it's a DK weight festive set that has less yardage, if there's not enough yardage for the size you want to make, then you could pad out that yardage by adding stripes. I used a colour change yarn here, but you can see the effect if you had a festive set that had different colours and then you used a solid colour to fill out so that you had enough yardage to make a full-size garment with your festive set. Another option is to perhaps just knit the sleeveless version if you've got enough yardage to make a vest style. You could also use a fingering weight set and perhaps have more yardage overall as a result of that. I held my fingering weight set double here for this particular version. However, you might choose to hold it with another yarn so that you can stretch out that fingering weight advent set, especially if it's a beautiful advent set and you want to make the most of a lovely fade or arrangement that the yarn dyer has created. So there's quite a few ways that you can use yarn, and I detail that in the colour notes at the start of the pattern and also incorporate a lot of information towards the back so you can do the calculations. And I'll just quickly go over a few tips for each option as well. I'll start with the stripes. As I mentioned in the construction overview, there's 2 fewer stripes in the front than the back, and then there's a button band. And because in this particular sample I chose to use a button band or ribbing colour that's the same as the stripes and I'm also working, I wanted to avoid a situation where I had a black stripe next to the button band here. So back to this stripe example, the pullover, the front has one of each colour on either side, as does the back. And you can see with the underarms, the front was knit here and the back, they also have the same colour stripe, which I didn't mind for this particular version. However, when I was knitting this, I realised that I didn't want to have black on one side. So to avoid having a black stripe next to my button band and making that look kind of odd and wide on that side, I decided to have a little play with my stripe arrangement. So I considered working a double black stripe here, which would then have the colour that I wanted on either side of the button band. That would just push that across by having the double there. What I decided to do was use a different section of this colour change yarn that was working with the overall garment, and I knit a kind of green version of the black stripe so that then working from the centre out it became symmetrical, which I wanted for the front, for the button band. So that worked well. I just used that green instead. I think if I had done a double black row it would have been quite wide, which would have been fine. However, I think this is more subtle and actually it's not that obvious, which then meant when we came to the front, it's symmetrical. I also made a similar decision with the underarm, because if I'd worked black for the back and then black for the front, it would be that double width line that you see here, which is fine. But because I'd made the decision to do that on the back, I thought, I'll do that on the underarm as well. So using a different section of this yarn to create a different colour next to the black. That's just a little tip for the stripes. With the underarm, as I mentioned, you'll work here, it's black. Then when I started working the sleeves, I started with the black so that it kind of ties in. You just continue the stripe pattern. Another option for the stripes that is a lot more straightforward, I did with my first Jolly jumper. It's just a random stripes. I'm still working front and back continuous stripes. However, I did here on the underarm work 2 colours like I did on this version. But overall, I used my hem colour to kind of have as a filling colour a little bit to tie it all in together. But this is a great way, I think, of using one of those festive sets. It's more of a random set of colours rather than a fade. And it can be a fun way to just kind of put pops of colour in and add some from your stash as well. So if you didn't have quite enough yarn in your festive set, you could fill it out by just adding some stashed leftovers or, again, adding some pops with the colour from the ribbing, but then maybe add some really bold bold colours in there as well. With this one, also knit to DK weight. However, I did hold fingering double for some of the sections because I just wanted to continue with this kind of green colour theme. So I dug around my stash, and this is all just stash yarn that I made this project with. And the fade option. This takes a bit more maths and calculating, and there's a couple of ways that you can work a fade. With this one I knit it as a mirrored fade, and I did that by using half of each colour on each side. So I started with this lighter colour and worked across, gradually changing to the darker colour, and then saved half to work the other side with as well. With this I didn't use a festive set. I had an idea of how much the total yardage would be, so I just kind of worked it to that. I did calculate how many rows I was knitting of each colour, and I did some colour alternating with this as well. You could either work stripes and change colours, or you could alternate a few rows between each colour to help them blend in a bit more. It's really up to you how you like to do that. And that's a really effective result if you want to have a mirrored fade for a kind of balanced overall effect. And then with this one I had this beautiful rainbow, and I wanted to knit it end to end, the festive set. As I mentioned before, these are fingering weight minis that I held double for this project. And I did a fair bit more mathing for this one. So you need to get your pen and paper down and calculate things. Firstly, make sure that you have enough yardage. If you're knitting a size where you might need to use fingering weight yarn, held double with another yarn so that you've got enough to complete the project. I began by using the table that describes how many stripes there are for the front and the sleeves, calculating how many stripes and multiplying the stripes by 6 rows because each stripe is a 6-row stripe. So start there. My body was a total of 26 stripes, and then the sleeves are 19 stripes each. However, when I was calculating this, because I wanted the colours to flow with the underarm rows, so there's 2 6-row stripes on the underarms, which equate to 1 6-row stripe for the sleeve. So with the 19 stripes for the sleeves overall, I counted one of the body row stripes, the underarm ones, in there. So 26 stripes for the body, 19 for the sleeve, less 1, which is also part of the body. And there's enough yardage because this stripe is only this long. There's enough yardage for that top of the sleeve as well. So 26 stripes times 6, and then 18 stripes times 6 for each sleeve. And then that gave me a number of rows, which I then divided by 24 because I had the 24 colour advent set. And then I think I got something like 15.5 rows per colour. And because with the front and back I needed to do 2 rows per colour, I didn't want to change on a wrong side row, so I had to be an even number. So I decided to go down to 14 rows, knowing that I could make it up with the sleeves. I could knit a bit more of each colour or more stripes, more rows for each sleeve colour because it's going to use less yardage. And it's also good to check, initially I had to check and make sure that I had enough for 14 rows per my little mini skein. So checked, made sure I had enough of that. And then because I was using the fingering weight held double, I decided to do a bit more fading by, after knitting several rows, I dropped 1 strand of the colour 1 and then I picked up 1 strand of colour 2 and knit a few rows with colour 1 and 2 held together, and then just colour 2 for here, so I dropped colour 1 and continued that. So I just faded in a little bit more by working my yarn in that particular way. A little bit of maths to work out the fade option, but totally a great result and really worth working on. Which is Judy's Magic cast on technique. It's fantastic for a provisional cast on option. Start by taking both ends of my yarn cake and just loosely tying them together. This will become undone and woven into the project later on. And I'm going to hold one thread with my forefinger and one with my thumb. Then I'll take, holding the needles parallel, top needle, bottom needle. I'll slide the top needle in behind that top thread, yarn, and keep the bottom one as is. As we work this cast on, the yarn here at the top will actually be cast onto the bottom needle, and the yarn here at the bottom will be cast onto the top needle. This will count as one stitch. So now I take the top yarn, bring it under and over and between for a stitch to be cast onto that bottom needle. Just hold those firmly at first. Now we take the bottom yarn and bring it up over the top needle and in between and back under. So now we have 2 stitches on the top needle. And repeat for the bottom, just keep that yarn out of the way. 2 stitches on each needle. So now it's the top, bring the yarn behind, over and in between for a top stitch. Bring that top yarn under, over and in between for a bottom stitch. And then it gets quite rhythmic once you get into the flow of it. I find having a little a counter thing here handy for counting. So you just count across one needle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the way I count as I go along is 8, 8, 8, 9, 9, 10, 10. And that would be 10 stitches. Continue until you've cast on the number required for your size. It will say stitches for each needle, so make sure you cast on the correct number for each needle. I'll just cast on another 10 here, so I can knit and show you how it's worked after that. $15, 16, 17, 19, 20. Okay, so the cast on, the top needle is going to be turned around and become the bottom needle. I'm going to use this yarn to work the first row of stitches with and break an end here, but be sure to secure that with my hand as I'm working those stitches. So the pattern instruction is to knit across the stitches on one needle. So just holding that yarn there in place, just knit across those stitches. So I managed to knit onto the wrong set of needles, which is fine. I'll just grab that other set and knit back across for the next row. I'll just purl across as instructed in the pattern. Okay, so back on both sets of needles. And this is the working side with the working yarn. It may pay at this point to either place that second set of stitches on some scrap yarn or put some needle stoppers on the end. Whatever you might like to use is little screen ones, or you might use something like this, and that will help you see which is the stitches you're working, and just keep those from falling off. So we've cast on 2 sets of stitches here, knit 1 row and purl 1 row, and that's equivalent to a 4-row stripe at this point. So I will continue with this colour for another 2 rows. I'll knit across and purl, and then at that point I would change colours for my next 6-row stripe. Okay, I finished those 2 rows and now have my 6-row stripe. So I'll incorporate the next colour, or just continue if knitting a fade or solid colour version. And I'll add that in, and I'll carry yarn as I go for the 6-row stripes. So just knitting across those stitches and purling back. Once I've worked the required number of rows and or stripes for the right side, there would be a few more than this, it's time to work across the left side. So I'll hold these stitches with either stoppers, holders, scrap yarn. I'll use a stopper. So to remind you, the direction of knitting for this side is knit, purl. On this side, which the neckline here, it will be knitting down and purling up, just slightly different. So you start with the right side facing, that will help you determine that. That knit back on the needle. Bring that needle in, and we're just going to knit across those stitches. However, for the first row, we will be knitting into the back of the loop, and we will take this knot off as well. So we'll knit through the back of the loop because the stitches are slightly twisted on this side of the cast on. And that will help them realign. Knit all the way to the end. Once you've reached the end, turn your work and purl back across and continue to work as per the pattern. And here's the beginnings of the Jolly jumper. This was the cast on, which also became the first 2 rows of the right side first stripe, or the first 2 rows of the right side, working up and purling, knitting up and purling back down, knit the number of rows required, come back over here and knit down for the left side, working in the opposite direction. Stitches are held once you've completed both sides, and you'll cast on for the front. Once you've finished the fronts and backs and the underarm rows, we'll work a stretchy 3-needle bind off to join the fronts and backs together under the arm here. And it looks like this on the inside, a neat little seam created with the stretchy 3-needle bind off. I've got this little swatch here to demonstrate the technique for you. And instead of having the sleeve, I'm just folding it over on itself. So this is equivalent to the 2 live rows of stitches that you'll find on the inside of the garment, because you'll be working this with the right sides of the fabric facing in and working with your garment inside out for that seam. There'll be an even number of stitches on each needle from working the underarm seams, and then you'll need a 3rd needle for the 3 needle bind off. And it's pretty straightforward. You'll start by joining yarn. The first step of this will be taking that 3rd needle, holding the 2 sets of stitches parallel, and insert the needle through the first stitch as if to knit and the second stitch as if to knit. Wrap your working yarn around and pull it through both of those stitches and slide it over to your 3rd needle, your right needle, and you have 1 stitch where you had 2. Repeat this a second time. Pull that yarn through. And you now have 2 stitches on that needle. And this is where we're going to do the stretchy bind off part. We will insert this front needle through the 2 stitches, through the front of those 2 stitches, wrap the yarn around and knit those stitches together. So where there were 2 stitches, now there's 1 stitch cast off in the stretchy bind off. And there's still 1 stitch on that right needle. And we'll keep repeating those steps. So knit 2 stitches together from the left needle, insert through the 2 stitches on the right needle and knit those 2 together for a stretchy bind off 2nd stitch. And you'll keep repeating that until all the stitches have been bound off. You will end up with a final stitch that you'll just pull the yarn through at the end. Down to the last stitches. Repeat those steps again. And for the final stitch, there we go. Pull the working yarn, break the yarn and pull that through the loop. And there you have a stretchy 3 needle bind off that provides a nice seam for your jolly jumper. Grafting stockinette. Here's a quick tutorial for grafting 2 stockinette pieces of knitting together seamlessly. In this example here, the Fizzy Lizzy pullover, the centre here has been grafted to join the 2 halves of the project together. And as you can see, it's quite a seamless join. You can't tell really where the knitting ends and starts. So a quick tutorial to demonstrate that. So we'll begin with our 2 pieces of knitting that we want to join together, and a tapestry needle, that's what you'll be using, and some scissors. Firstly, we'll need to cut off a length of yarn from the work that's long enough to graft the 2 pieces together. So estimating about 4 times the length of the work will be plenty there. Knit it long enough, but don't want it too long that it gets all tangly. The work on each needle, and it could be that both pieces are on one set of needles in a magic loop form. We've got 2 sets of needles here. And we'll be working with the right side facing. So the wrong side will be down and the 2 right sides facing. And we will begin by threading that yarn onto the needle and by working some set-up stitches. So it's quite a repetitive process, but the first 2 stitches set up for the rest of the grafting. I have the yarn attached to this front piece at this point, and the first setup stitch is to bring it purlwise through the front of the first stitch on the front needle, and then going to bring it knitwise through the first stitch on the second or back needle and pull that snug. And now we'll begin the 4-step process that will continue for the rest of the grafting. Step 1 is insert the needle through that first stitch on the first needle, knitwise, and take off the needle. So 1 stitch has been dropped. Now bring that needle back through what is now the first stitch, purlwise, and leave that on the needle. Now we come to the back needle and we're going to insert the needle, tapestry needle, purlwise into that first stitch and take it off the needle. And now come to what is now the first stitch on the back needle and insert it knitwise and leave it on the needle. And we will continue those 4 steps. Insert knitwise, take off the needle, insert purlwise, leave on the needle. Insert purlwise, take off the needle, insert knitwise, leave on the needle. And you can see some stitches have been grafted together now. Continuing that stockinette pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Knitwise and off the needle, purlwise and leave on the needle, purlwise off the needle, knitwise, leave on the needle. And it's good to just stop and keep stretching it out as you go so you can admire that magic, but also make sure the tension is nice and even. And continue knitwise and off the needle, purlwise, leave on the needle, purl and off, and knit. So you can start to turn the manoeuvres into one. So to make it a little bit faster. It's pretty rhythmic. Once you get into the zone, it happens quite readily. Just need to give yourself a bit of headspace and quiet to focus. And graft your knitting. And once you get to the final 2, just slip each one off. And done. Give it a little stretch out. Okay, so I have my funny little sample here and want to demonstrate picking up stitches for the ribbing edge. The pattern says pick up 4 stitches for every 6 rows, which is quite handy with the 6-row stripes. Here, because I've got this bound off edge, I've got kind of an extra row in there, so I'll pick up 5 stitches along here. So start with that kind of edge there. The aim is to pick them up in a straight line so that it's nice and neat. And to pick them up, poke the needle through the stitch with both of the legs of the stitch going through the needle, or the needle going through both of the legs, and knit a stitch. So that's pick up and knit a stitch. A second. Keeping that line nice and neat. Then I'll skip a stitch. Or skip a row and work the next 2. So I have 5 here, 1 just to kind of account for that extra bind off edge. And continue along the next colour. So I might skip into the next, skip 1 row, go to the next. 1, 2, skip 1, 1, 2. So that's 4 stitches into those 6 rows. And continue on like that. I'll skip that first row again. And continue along that line. When you weave in the ends, you'll tighten up some of those colour change looser bits. When it comes to binding off, you can use a regular bind off. I've just used a standard bind off here, keeping it loose-ish, not too loose, so that it's nice and stretchy. I also offer the option of a tubular bind off in the pattern, which just adds that bit neater edge. I think it's particularly nice around the collar to work the tubular bind off, just for a neater finish there. In this sample, I worked the tubular for all of them, but I also worked the regular for the hem on this one and the arms, and then tubular bind off for the neck. Yeah, you can mix and match the bind offs to what suits you. I've knit a little bit of twisted ribbing on my trusty swatch here, which it's still effective for the tubular bind off tutorial. You'll need a working yarn of approximately 3 times the length of the area to bind off, which will be quite long for the hem, shorter for the sleeves. And thread that onto a tapestry needle. So it's quite repetitive. There are 4 steps, although you'll start off with 1 setup step first. The setup step is to insert the needle through the first stitch as if to knit, and because we've been knitting twisted ribbing through the back loop, insert the needle through the back loop and just take that stitch off the needle. Now the first of the 4 steps. The next stitch is a purl stitch, and noting that when you're working this ribbing will help you remember to see where you're up to. So when you see a purl stitch here, you'll purl or insert the tapestry needle as if to purl in the stitch next to it, that neat stitch there, right into the front, and pull that yarn through. Then come back to the purl stitch, insert purlwise and pull off the needle. And that's 2 stitches bound off there. Next we have a knit stitch, and this will be worked a bit differently. The setup, or the first part of this, is bringing the needle behind the work through the front, then through that purl stitch and back through to the back. And then you're going to insert the needle through the back loop as if to knit through the back loop and pull that stitch off. So that's the 4 steps. I'll show you again. Purlwise through the second stitch and pull the thread through. Then come back and purl, take it off the needle, that first stitch. Next, bring your needle through the center of the next 2 stitches and push it through the center of that purl stitch, pull to the back, insert the needle in the first stitch as if to knit through the back loop and take that stitch off the needle. 4 steps. So I know that when I see the purl bump, I'm up to the purl step, which is purl, purl, and then the next stitch is the knit. Insert through the center of the next 2 stitches. Once you've bound a few stitches off, you'll get into the flow of this. It is a little bit more time consuming, but it's a nice finish and worth it. It's a bit tricky to undo though, so make sure you're nice and focused while you're working this and keep track of where you're up to. And continue on until the last 2 stitches. And just pull the yarn through the final stitch. Take that off the needle. And there you are. Nice, neat finish for your ribbing.